Okay, good morning and welcome to the October 17th, 2017 Wright County Board meeting. We'll begin this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you all. The minutes from October 10th, has everyone had a chance to look them over? Chris, do we have any typos?
I didn't find typos, so yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last week.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Hewsome and second by Commissioner Delyden. Seeing no further discussion, Lee, you didn't have anything?
No, sir.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous. The agenda for today. Any additions, deletions, corrections? Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve today's agenda.
Motion by Commissioner Vetch.
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Delyden. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved of. The consent agenda, does anyone want anything removed for further consideration?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Potter, second by Commissioner Hewsome. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The consent agenda is approved. 9:02, our Parks and Recreation Administrator, Mr. Mark Mattice. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm not sure why I put 10 minutes on here, so I'll just stand for a while. Hopefully it doesn't take 10 minutes. In front of you today, the Park Commission reviewed potential land donation. We don't get very many of those. Most people like to sell their stuff. So 16.5 acre property donation to be included in the park system, asking for authorization to accept that donation and to work with the county's attorney's office and the county surveyor's office to prepare the necessary documents for transfer, which would be a survey, legal description, and then of course the deed. In your motion, if you are willing to accept that, it would be approving the necessary funds as transfer. My suggestion is to pay that out of the park dedication funds in Victor Township, where we have a balance of $17,415. It'll be minimal expense. You know, you have to pay a little property tax, $5 deed transfer, you know.
Tag fee and all the other things.
Tag fee.
Correct.
And, go ahead, Chris.
Mr. Chair, Mark, I guess, like what kind of land is this, or, you know, what's the overall implications? I know it's not a real large piece.
Right.
But, I mean, taking it off the tax rolls, and what are we going to use it for, or?
Well, it's next to Albert Yeager, which is a nature area.
Mr. Chair, Mark, why don't you put it up there?
I'd love to, but, you know, I put it in your packet and I didn't.
No, I know. Here, you want a copy?
Well, just in case somebody else wants to see
I
it.
just think it'd be easier for everybody to understand. If you put it up there and you could show how it's related to the other park.
I got about halfway here and I forgot about it. There you go. That's not very good. I moved up.
And for information, the yellow highlighted one is
Would be the
Yeager Park.
Is Yeager nature area.
And then, yep.
That's in Victor Township. It's 40 acres. It's a wetland restoration site, native prairie, and some trees. Small hiking trail. That was actually, landowners in the area actually asked us to put the trail in a few years ago because they want to walk out there. So once every 3 weeks we go mow a little section of trail as we're driving by it. Not a big deal. The 16.5 acres is this triangle parcel highlighted in blue. Call that blue. Mostly wooded to the north and east of the parcel. The southwest, the diagonal line going up, there's wetlands in there. The gentleman Says he doesn't want to see development on it. He's going to probably try to donate it and not allow houses on it anyhow to somebody, some form, fashion, and we were his first stop since it is adjacent to the park. Future use, you could extend the trail coming off this corner into that area. You do have a road crossing. If we expand, and we have talked briefly as staff about maybe expanding some of our veterans hunts, and we could maybe include Albert Yeager as one of those locations in the future. I'm not saying it's going to happen next year, but you know, we do a waterfowl hunt that it's an awesome event. You know, maybe ending up having a turkey hunt in Wright County and having a couple different parcels where they meet up with a guide and have a couple days to hunt turkeys. This would be a great spot for something like that. But pretty much we're not looking at big development at Albert Yeager Park.
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Potter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The southeast and northwest line on that property, is that a ditch? Is it a county ditch? And what shape is it in? And what are we just buying? Or what are we getting here?
Are we going to be on the benefit?
Are we on the
Chris,
We don't want to do
Chris, the ditch guy?
I don't believe it's a county ditch, though.
You'd have to look. I did not.
It's not. It's not. Yeah, I say that just north of here, Lake Ann would come from the west and go flowing to the east, and then it would, out of Lake Emma would be the 12-mile creek.
Commissioner Dahlheim, and I think we did pull up the ditch layer at the Parks Commission meeting, and it was not highlighted as a county ditch.
Okay.
No, I just think back
when I see that, I'm going, okay, that looks like a ditch.
I think we had that same question at the Park Commission.
But I think it's kind of a natural waterway in there, but
Of course, the engineers and lawyers would like to see us get more ditches.
That's correct. As beacons up.
And then, Mark, is there?
I think the lawyer's shaking his head no. I'm guessing he's the lawyer.
Is there actually a little bit of, I know the land doesn't touch because of the road, but is there actually a little bit of an overlap?
A little bit.
There is, yeah, that looks like it here, so, okay. And just for the board, I said this is in my district, I'm very familiar with it. I think I think it'd be a good asset to, you know, with the, especially if, to be able to utilize it in a way, you know, to maybe allow some, you know, like you did with the hunting of the pheasants or whatever it is up in
The ducks.
Ney Park or whatever. Use this for ducks, whatever, you know.
that's what they're doing at Ney Park.
Ducks, okay. But this could, yeah, there are turkeys out there and stuff too.
Mr. Chair?
So. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Bob.
Is it possible thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. Is it possible for Bob, while he's out there doing whatever he's doing with his laptop, to find out what the property tax on that parcel is right this time? So we have that, so what are we taking off the tax rolls? I mean, it's probably not a lot, but
I'm taking something.
it's something.
Yeah, I guess that
You have
was
the
kind of
number there,
my,
Bob?
Kind of, you were going that way with that, your question, I thought, you know.
Yeah, and-
Mr. Chair, it looks like it's about $682 for 2017.
That's a budget buster right there. Budget. 682, well, thank you, that was the question I had, Mr. Chair, thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Coordinator, sir.
You're welcome, Mr. Parks Administrator, sir.
Okay, and the Park Commission is on board with this?
Correct.
Okay, the District Commissioner seems like on board with that. I'll make a motion to accept the 16.5 acre donation into the park system.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mark, and do we need anything else in the motion? But
You said the payment.
It would be the authorization of funds out of the park dedication fees.
Yeah, it's part of, the motion will be part of the authorization of the whole, what he asked for here.
you're okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. So motion by Commissioner Potter, then
And I
second.
don't think you need to tell me to work with the surveyor and the attorney. If I have any problems, I'll come back.
Okay. So motion by Commissioner Potter, second by Commissioner
That's
Fitch.
in the-
Further discussion.
that's in the board action.
You call for a vote?
Further discussion, no? Oh, I thought Chris had a little bit more.
You did have it.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
That took close to 10 minutes, Mark.
Long park board people.
Okay, Mr. Robert Hebel, our auditor treasurer. Good morning, Bob.
Hey, good morning, board. new technology, I guess. We don't have an HDMI connector up here, so, but it's not a oh, do you got one for your 2-in-1?
I don't know that I do, Bob.
Okay. What I was going to show you, OpenGov, this is the new computer, it's a 2-in-1, doesn't have the same adapter as the Surfaces. But I was going to have you approve the September budget reports. Again, we're on track with revenues, we're on track with expenses. There were some highlights. At first glance, it looks like we're exceeding overtime, but historically, by October, we're exceeding overtime on budget-wise. This is the time that we're out there putting the roads in and doing maintenance. By the end of the year, we're right on track with it.
Is that where the overtime is going on the highway department?
It's highway and corrections in the jail.
That would make sense, corrections.
Well, corrections, yeah.
Until they get staffed up.
But highway, normally it's in the wintertime with all the snow plowing and stuff.
Historically have overtime in highway. No, you're right. I apologize. I didn't look when it was incurred. It could have been incurred in the winter.
Normally it's in the winter when we have snow plowing because they get called out at all hours.
Yep.
In the summer, really shouldn't be a whole lot of overtime unless there's some emergencies that occur. Mr. Chair?
Yes, go
I
ahead.
do have a question regarding court services. It's page 6, and it's the credit card surcharges for them. Mm-hmm. I see we're at 98% of budget. Budget was 4,000. Looks like we're going to exceed that. How close are we to getting this credit card stuff all straightened out with for everybody?
Well, two comments there, Board. The credit card surcharges is based off the revenue we're taking in. So if we're ahead on revenue of collections, we're going to be above on the credit card surcharge. Okay. So the fact that we're above or we're anticipating for credit card surcharges is a good indication we're above revenues.
So would that fall under miscellaneous revenues then?
No, that would be for court services. That's where they're collecting their fees.
Well, then we're not above. Fees and service charges? We're actually below. We're at 66%.
You sure it wouldn't be at our miscellaneous revenue?
I'm sorry, maybe it is under miscellaneous revenues.
It must
That
be,
was
'cause
way
that's why
over.
we're floating so high over. Or is it the random drug testing fees and they're paying them via credit card?
Yeah,
It
could be.
well, it's whatever.
Whatever.
It's being paid for by credit cards,
Yeah.
whatever they're.
Whatever, so it could be, it could be a conglomerate of all those
This
areas.
number's irrelevant.
Yeah, that's why I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. Are we paying a higher rate than, on that one, when they paid individually there than what if we went with,
I don't, then that was kind of the question. I don't know what we're paying
I don't know what we're paying either on that
for the
one.
surcharge, but
Well, Board, and I can give you an update there. We're down to the 2 vendors, and we do believe that we're going to be lowering our absorption fees, soliciting one countywide vendor.
Is it something you want to have them look into a little further, or?
no, I was just kind of curious on, and I forgot that it should be tied into revenues. And so, yeah, the only thing I think of is that it has to be under miscellaneous revenue, but I'll talk with Mike and he'll have a better handle on it. I'll make a motion to approve,
September revenue expenditure report.
September revenue expenditure report.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Leyden,
I'll second that.
second by Commissioner Houston. Further discussion?
Commissioners, I will look into that. Miscellaneous revenue for court services is really the detention collections that we're collecting. I'm not sure we're accepting credit cards for those, so there will be some looking into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just trying to get it trying to figure it out, because I don't know, for some reason that what jumped out at me. It's not an excessive amount by any means, but
Okay, sounds good. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous. And we do have a public hearing at 9:30, will be the next thing on our agenda, but it's not quite 9:30, so we'll go on. Lee, is it all right if we go on to the personnel?
Yes, I would recommend personnel minutes, and then if there's any updates the board wants to do,
Okay.
can make,
And then,
depending on the timing.
Okay. Commissioner Delighten, would you like to do the personnel?
Yeah, if I can find them. There they are.
Very good.
So it's the Personnel and Employee Relations meeting of October 11th, 2017. Let's see here.
I seen it a moment ago.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's on the
back of
back side of that. Yeah, I bet you do have it.
Back of the map.
There it is.
It's there, yeah. When he said the very back, he meant the very back.
Very back. I know I seen it. Personnel Employee Relations Committee met on October 11th. Members present were Delighten, Hewsome, Kelly. Others present were Johnson and Wilczek. There was one item to discuss. Facility staffing. Facilities Director Alan Wilczek provided an update on his plans to restructure the custodial team. We're looking at having an outside janitorial service come in sometime in 2018, and then the existing custodial staff will be moved to daytime hours. And then the whole idea behind it is to convert those people into real maintenance people to be able to do a number of different things. We've got 2 maintenance staff that will be retiring very soon, the facilities manager and a custodian. And in light of the one, he wants to come up with a facilities operation engineers. And this person would be educated and skilled in HVAC maintenance and service.
Sure.
Currently they've been using a lot of time from Climate Air, and this should reduce some of those costs if we have somebody that's capable of taking care of all those sort of things. Also be able to respond to emergency repairs more quickly, so hopefully we'll get somebody that's very mechanically inclined, that's done a number of different things, plumbing, or, you know, has some little bit of electrical experience or something to that effect too. Currently we're using Greenview out at the highway and the Public Works building through the end of this year. They don't really are interested in becoming full-time and permanently for the cleaning, but they may work with us just until we get somebody on board to do all of this. The consulting firm recommended grade 11 for this facilities operation engineer's position. Hourly rate starting at $21.96 to a maximum of $30.74. And this is the same grade as a facility supervisor position. And he's hoping to hire someone shortly after custodian retires at the end of November. There are 3 positions in the budget that have been unfilled for maintenance people or custodians. 2 were eliminated from next year's budget to pay for the contractual janitorial services. That leaves 1 position that might be needed at the new courts facility. I suggested that we post now for a facilities operation engineer. Since there's room in the budget because we haven't hired any of those other people. And my concern is, instead of waiting till the end of the year, we may not get somebody the first go-around, and we've got money in the budget for it. Bringing somebody on and actually having a little bit of transitional time frame with some of the current employees might be beneficial to the county. So we're recommending authorizing advertising for the new facilities operation engineer. With that, I'll make a motion to accept the minutes and the recommendation.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Dowling, is Alan planning to just slowly ramp up the tooling for this position? You know, something like the R22 and different items that they would, whether they house it in a van or a truck? Because this position having a level of HVAC work that we don't have, I wouldn't believe we'd have the tools here up front, so is that something that we're gonna get the position and then get the tools based on this person's recommendations?
I would think so. I mean, that would be the best. And there's also a possibility that this person may have some of those tools too, depending on who they hire, which is, you know, one of the other reasons why I'd like to get this started sooner than later, just for that particular reason. And I think there was in the budget for next year a vehicle for this person.
Correct. Yeah. We discussed that this person would need a vehicle because to go to the different facilities.
But yeah, it's a good point about the tools. But a lot of those people currently have their own tools, so.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just best to wait and see before we go and purchase a bunch of things, before we know exactly what we need.
Absolutely.
I think it'll actually be, for the size of the county with all the buildings we have, I think it'll be beneficial to the county.
Well, I think it's been
Definitely.
talked about a lot of times. I mean, we've had janitorial staffs, you know, like, why are we hiring these guys paying all this money when we could be doing it ourselves, so.
Well, to pay a contracting firm to change filters is not the
No.
most efficient thing to
No,
do.
it's not a good use of our dollars.
Does that also include having certain people mow lawns? Which I guess we contract that out, and that's been really great too, from my understanding. It's saved us some money, you know, especially with not having some of those maintenance people replaced.
Okay, so we do have a motion to approve the minutes and recommendations by Commissioner Delida, and it was seconded by Commissioner Hewson. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The minutes and recommendations are approved. We might as well do some advisory committee updates. Commissioner Potter, are you all ready for us?
Yeah,
I know you were at a meeting last night.
Yes, last Thursday, we had the, of course, Executive Committee, and Derek, Commissioner Vetch filled in for Commissioner Burrell because he was farming or whatever he was doing. You got a good overview. It had the virtual tour of the courts and different things, and I think it was really good to have Commissioner Vetch there, so I think he's going to get up to speed on some of the things we've been doing. He got to ask a lot of questions, and, you know, that, and we'll be getting 11 o'clock today, we'll get the full view of this, which is good to make this move forward. We're just getting to the final little stages before you start making bid packs and all that. That part was good. Friday, I attended the AMC board meeting in St. Paul. It was quite a bit of discussion on a lot of different fronts. One of them was opioid litigation, and I had emailed Tom Kelly on what was going on there, who had been contacted with, and I sent the notice over to Lee, our coordinator, to make sure that he was aware of what's going on there. They talked about the legislative conference for the 2018 before the session starts. We're going to do that like 1 week before session starts because they'll all be in St. Paul. It'll be easy to get to, and just trying to put that structure together, how we're going to do this. We're getting a room, you know, hospitality suite for AMC, and making sure we have schedules with legislators. We're having Lockridge Grindle help us put that together. That's our consultant and a lobbyist that we hire at AMC. Also, we talked about the fall meetings update. There was one fall meeting already, and there'll be more going on. And that ran into a discussion on should we have more than 2 a year, and it was consensus that felt that 2 a year was a fair amount of district meetings. And then they were talking about making it centrally located instead of bouncing around, and the idea was that if you bounce it around, we get to see what other counties and their things are doing, which is good for us, how we're all in this together. It's not just one area. And our annual conference, 320 have registered so far, which is good. For the annual meeting, it sounds like for 2018, it sounds like we'll be going to Bloomington because they made an attractive bid to try to get us there, because St. Cloud now have problems accommodating what we need.
Yep.
And we've just grown too big and have too many things for that. So it's in Stearns County, St. Cloud particularly, have not addressed these. The same requests have gone over like 3-4 times to do things, and they haven't done them. But Bloomington wants our business, and they have the venue at the Doubletree that's big enough to handle this. So it looks like the 2018 annual conference will be in Bloomington at the Doubletree, which is good because you have a lot of rooms there, because that's one of the challenge with St. Cloud is the rooms were booked in less than 40 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I commute.
Yeah, it was tough, you know. So that going to that one, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time here, but I want to make sure you understand what we're doing when we're sitting there for 4.5 hours at that meeting. The governance reports came there, and basically the bylaws, affiliate policy, personnel policy there. It's Susan Morris took that in. I believe that you have an email or from the AMC. You can go on their website and see what's else been done. It's been over a 4-month process to try to get these updated. The bylaws and everything else. Most of them are just house cleaning, things that are old from that. The chair, Vice Chair Scott Schulke did a business partnership committee report, which is how can we work better with business and in our communities and that. It really, nothing earth-shattering, but, you know, little things we can do to help make the difference in there. And then the check on with Congress on the SALT issues, and that's, I'm forgetting that acronym right now, but and the legislative day will be from February, on the Capitol, February 28th and March 1st will be the 2 days for it, just to make sure you got that straightened out there.
March 12th?
March 1st.
March 1st?
Yeah, 28th and March 1st through March 1st.
yeah,
2 days,
yeah.
because we don't have leap year this year. So this, and one of the other things we had talked about is purchasing the properties next to AMC headquarters because they came up for sale. And we came up against the St. Paul Capital Rehabilitation Commission. They want to save those old buildings, and they don't want a parking lot. So we're not pursuing purchasing that because our parking down there is limited at best. And it was whether we stay there, because that was the old MCIT building, whether we stay there, where we move, we expand, and that's footprint. But what came out of it is that the property owners, which there's a few of them on that, own 14 spaces of parking across the street. And we are in negotiations on either purchasing them, leasing them from them, so we have additional parking, and those 14 spots would be enough to accommodate our needs. So hopefully it goes that way. Preference is to purchase them so that we don't have to worry about in the future. And I believe that the owner that has the rights on those is leaning towards that with us because they're going to maximize their dollar return on that. Otherwise, there are a lot of good discussions on a lot of different fronts. I mean, the opioids took a lion's share of the time because it is something completely out of control in that one. But West Virginia, there was enough to give every man, woman, and child in that county 1,000 pills a month. It's like, wow.
Yeah, you're hearing those statistics all over.
Yeah, those are things that got to get a handle on. And other than that, I have the whole packet here. I'll leave it on the bullpen for anybody if they want to read through it and see what's going on. And that's what I have, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and we are pretty close here. Why don't we, 9:29, Lee, we'll basically suspend this meeting, is that the correct terminology? Or?
Right, and we'll open up for a
okay.
hearing here, but I think it'd be wise to kind of give an overview of today's proceedings and methodologies.
So we're going to suspend the board meeting. We have a public hearing this morning, and this public hearing is for the establishment and correction of Wright County Ditch 18, Ditch 36, and County Ditch 38 drainage system records under statutes section 103E.101 subdivision A4.
No, 4A.
4A, excuse me. Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to welcome everyone who has come today. Under consideration at this hearing is the establishment and correction of the drainage system record, drainage system
Reestablishment.
the reestablishment and correction of the drainage system record, Wright County ditches 18, 36, and 38, including redefining the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic, structure locations, materials, dimensions, and elevations, and the right-of-way of this public drainage system. The purpose of this hearing is to review the engineer's investigation and report of findings and receive comment from those affected by the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system records. This is an evidentiary proceeding. The proceedings are being recorded in order to preserve the record. The presentation for each drainage system will be taken in numerical order. So we'll do ditch 18 first. The order of business for the hearing will be as follows. First, the drainage attorneys, that's our the drainage attorney's legal and engineering consultants will present the procedural and legal requirements, followed by the engineering analysis of historical records, physical investigation, and other evidence supporting its determinations regarding the drainage system record. Following the staff presentation, I will open the hearing for the public comment. The board would like to hear your comments on the proposed reestablishment and correction of the drainage system record and any information relevant to that purpose. Specifically, the board is interested in whether it is missing information used to define the public drainage system, whether the recommended alignment, grade, or configuration of the ditch creates concerns about loss of drainage benefit, whether and how your land drains to the public system, and whether you have concerns or issues associated with any portion of the public systems crossing your property. And finally, whether the recommended alignment, grade, or configuration of the ditch creates other material concerns the board should consider prior to adopting the engineer's recommendation. Though information may be presented regarding the current condition of the drainage system, this hearing is not an appropriate time to discuss issues related to possible future actions such as repairs. If such actions are warranted, the drainage authority will initiate separate proceedings to discuss those issues. However, if you have an immediate concern, we invite you to contact our drainage inspector, Mr. Mike Young, and he's right there raising his hand. Okay, the purpose of this hearing is to review the findings and evidence regarding records defining the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic structure locations, materials, dimensions, and elevations, or right-of-way of the drainage systems as originally constructed or subsequently improved. During the public hearing, commissioners may ask questions of staff or consultants making presentations and of the commenters as well in order to clarify any testimony. In addition, if a member of the public asks a question and commissioners believe that a response from the drainage authority, staff, or consultant can readily resolve the question or enrich the testimony, the commissioners may ask me to have the appropriate staff member or consultant speak to the question. I will exercise my judgment as to whether to allow such discussion. However, commissioners' expression of their positions and general discussion concerning the subject of the public hearing should be avoided during the public comment portion of the public hearing. Board discussion will occur after all members of the public have had a chance to speak and the public comment period has been closed. Board discussion may occur and be concluded at this or a subsequent meeting as the board decides. If a member of the public would like to make a comment, please stand and address the board. I will recognize you, and I would like you to come to the podium to speak, because if you speak from out here, it will not get picked up good on the audio. So speak clearly and state your name and address for the record. If you have a specific question concerning the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record, we may ask our administrator, engineer, or legal consultant to respond. If you have anything in writing that you wish to submit, you can provide it to me before the close of the meeting here today, and if for the close of the comments, and I will note its receipt for the record. To ensure that all wishing to comment on the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system records have time to speak, I may limit the time of any single speaker to about 3 minutes. I don't believe that's going to happen. We have a history kind of on this board to hear people out, and now if you started to repeat yourself a bunch of times, Commissioner DeLayden will stop you, I'm sure, so. He does that to me anyway.
What?
Okay.
What did you say?
So please limit your redundant and repetitive comments, including, okay. Would any of the board members here like to make any comments before we begin today?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
On with the show.
And with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over at this time to Mr. John Kolb. He's our drainage attorney representing the county today. Good morning, Mr. Kolb.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Board. Just to reiterate, this portion of the public hearing will deal with the correction and reestablishment of Wright County Ditch 18 drainage system records under statute section 103E.101 subdivision 4A, and as you said, we will take ditches 36 and 38 following this. To the extent that there are going to be some redundant portions of presentations by staff or by consultants, we'll try to streamline that and note where we're omitting things in subsequent presentations, Mr. Chairman and Board. County Ditch 18 is located in Section 36 of French Lake Township and generally flows from south to north from Skiffsrum, or also known as Mud Lake, to an open channel approximately 1,400 feet upstream of the Crow River. The total drainage area for Ditch 18 is approximately 850 acres and are found in Sections 35 and 36 of French Lake Township and Sections 1 and 2 of Cokato Township. The drainage area is predominantly developed for agricultural use. The drainage area also includes Mud Lake County Park. Inspection of the drainage system by the Drainage Authority staff revealed a lack of written documentation describing elevations and grades throughout the system. The Drainage Authority's engineer has investigated and drafted a historical technical analysis for the drainage system, which is contained in the engineer's historical review memorandum dated August 10, 2017. As part of his analysis of the drainage system, the drainage engineer has identified the existing functional alignment, dimension, and grade of the drainage system as it provides beneficial public drainage. This functional alignment, dimension, and grade match the basic functional efficiency of the system as designed and established to provide beneficial public drainage. The engineer has also identified the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic structure locations, materials, dimensions, and elevations, and right-of-way of the drainage system as constructed and subsequently improved. The drainage engineer's study included an evaluation of existing records and evidence, including but not limited to applicable aerial photographs, soil borings or test pits, culvert dimensions, and invert elevations. The engineer also reviewed crossing design records where they were available. In order to properly manage the drainage system in a way that recognizes its intended beneficial public functions, the Drainage Authority initiated proceedings to identify the extent of its jurisdiction over the system as currently existing and providing beneficial public drainage. The Board initiated the records correction process by resolution by adopting findings in an order dated February 14, 2017. The February 14, 2017 resolution directed the engineer to investigate and report the findings, report findings defining the alignment, cross-section profile, the hydraulic structure information, and the right-of-way of the drainage system. Pursuant to the requirements of 103E.101 subdivision 4C, the Board mailed notice of its final hearing, the hearing today, to the Commissioner of Natural Resources, to the Executive Director of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and to all property owners benefited or damaged by the drainage system based on the current benefits and damages rule. That mailing took place on September 28, 2017. Other interested parties were provided notice by publication in the Herald Journal. Evidence and notices are on file with the Drainage Authority. That publication took place on September 22nd, September 29th, and October 6th. As the Chairman noted, the substantive comments received during today's hearing will be incorporated into final findings of the Board. This is an evidentiary hearing, and additional evidence of all actions in this matter, including any preliminary orders, oaths, appointments, affidavits of mailing, publication, as well as hearing agendas and presentation materials, will be considered part of the record in this matter. At this hearing, the engineer will present his report. The engineer will also provide an explanation of the process and information used to determine the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic structure information, and right-of-way of the drainage system. The intent of this proceeding is to reconcile the historical record of the drainage system with the alignment, cross-section, and the additional hydraulic information as determined by analyzing existing records and evidence, including the aerial photographs, soil borings, and other on-the-ground investigation performed by the engineer. Future work on the drainage system, if any, will use the as-constructed and subsequently improved condition established in these proceedings as a baseline for determining a repair or improvement of the system. But it does not mean that the establishment of this system to any extent will be subject to any future repair. That is a whole separate proceeding, and that requires additional considerations by this board. Based on the comments and testimony today, the Drainage Authority may make one or more of the following decisions. First, you may adopt an order affecting the reestablishment and correction of the drainage system records as described in the engineer's review report and recommendation. You may direct the engineer for further review of the area or portions of the drainage system and determine if adjustments should be made to the proposed drainage system record. You may adopt an order rejecting the engineer's report and directing a new report be conducted, or you may direct the engineer to make adjustments and submit a revised report. Again, you've given instructions to the folks present today in terms of their public comments. I just want to reiterate that comments related to the repair of the system are not germane to this hearing. This simply should deal with the records and the extent of the drainage system as reported in the engineer's report. The decision standard for the board is whether, based on the proceedings and all the evidence that you've considered, that the evidence presented at this hearing and testimony of the consulting engineer and the public, you find that the existing and reestablished records together define the alignment, cross-section profile, hydraulic structure, locations, materials, dimensions, and elevations, and the right-of-way of the drainage system. Unless the board has any questions of me, Mr. Chairman, I'll be followed by the engineer.
Okay, do any board members have questions?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Commissioner Dillon.
And I'll leave this up to Mr. Kolb, but whether or not you want to answer it or if you want to let the engineers answer it. But I'd just like it explained to the public on why we're at this point, because of why we're having to reestablish and I don't think that's been brought up at all yet.
Yeah, good point.
Sure, I'd be happy.
Tell us where our old records are.
What you did with them.
I'd be happy to just give a brief history. And again, this is only going to contain what I understand from my experience with the board here over the last year or year and a half or so. The board has taken, number one, a more proactive role on maintaining the drainage systems within the county at the request of landowners who need those drainage systems for beneficial drainage for agricultural and other purposes, to include some municipalities that utilize your drainage systems as an outlet for their municipal storm system. So you've become more proactive at going out and doing the repairs. And one of the first questions you have to ask in every repair proceeding or in every consideration of repair is what we're proposing to do actually repair? And typically you go back into the drainage system record and you look at, is there an as-built plan which basically defines what was constructed in either the original establishment, a subsequent improvement. You look at what's in those records that would be able to tell you, is what I'm doing actually repair, or is it something other than repair? And then you start from there. So we talked about, in my comments, I talked about this as kind of the baseline. You're establishing a baseline. On several of the ditches, when the county has gone back and looked at those records, there are records missing. You look on the ground and you see a ditch, and you have some evidence in the record that historically that ditch has been maintained according to the alignment that you see on the ground, but then you look and you can't find the actual establishment or the engineering report as part of the establishment that says that's the actual alignment. Or you have crossings, culverts, bridges, those sorts of things, and you don't know if that's what was originally called for in the design or whether that culvert was too small, too large, at the wrong elevation, because you don't have the actual record for that. And so this proceeding that you're in right now is relatively new to the drainage code. It came about in about 2010, and its purpose was just this. Increasingly, drainage authorities were running into this friction about, is what we're doing actually repair? Is this the actual system that we're dealing with? And so the legislature provided a process by which those records could be reestablished. So your issue is, you're finding increasingly common that as you're doing repairs, you're going back to the drainage system record and you're not finding all of the records that, had they been perfectly kept, would be in the record. Or you can't find the record at all because between changes in responsibility over who was managing those systems, some of those records left the auditor's office, went to the SWCD, came back, and there were other entities managing that. And in the process, I think some of those records simply were either lost or discarded or weren't managed according to what would otherwise be a best practice. So that's what gets you here today is you're looking at the drainage system record and you don't have the amount of information necessary, and so that triggers the authority under 103E.101 for the board at its discretion to initiate the process that you're in currently.
John, I have a question too. It's kind of follow-up on this. But let's say Bob finds a box of the records a year from now, and there was something, maybe it's not material, but it's just a little bit different of an elevation, or, you know, your soil borings were off 6 inches. Would we have to go through this process again? Or how would that work, I guess, I don't know, it's a far-fetched thing, but I'm just making it.
It's not far-fetched at all, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we run into this quite often where somewhere in the back corner of some ancient vault in an auditor's office somewhere, there's this golden box, and we open the golden box, and the angels start singing, and all of the records are there, right? So we do run into that. You would not have to reinitiate or redo this process. You would, however, as a board, want to consider, what do we do now? We have better information or more precise information than we had at the time. So you'd have to, at a minimum, go back and reconcile the new information you have with what you've done in this proceeding. And to the extent that, for accuracy's sake, you would want to make that correction, you could do an abbreviated procedure. There's a number of different things we could do to make sure that you were being consistent with that more accurate information. But again, in the absence of that, the process and the evidence that's supposed to be considered is laid out in statute, and I believe that's what your engineer has done.
Okay.
Good.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Just one other just statement is that this one I think we're dealing with was done in 1912, and a lot of these were in the early 1900s. So even we'd like to blame our current auditor, he wasn't around at that time. Looks sometimes that he's that age, but that's having to deal with this board, I think. Anyway,
Yeah.
And then that's the problem, is that these things are
Right.
very old, very, very old, and those records are gone.
Mr. Chair, we have asked the townships, to kind of be on the lookout for some of these old records too. So you never know, as Mr. Kolb said, they magically appear.
Sometimes they do. Again, any other questions?
Okay.
I'll be followed by the engineer, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And we will have Mr. Joe Lewis from Houston Engineering do our presentation for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board. Let me just get plugged in here. Okay, it looks like we're set. So what I do have here today is a few slides to kind of set the stage a little bit for our process as an engineer to review the records and establish and reestablish the records. I will mention, similar to Mr. Kolb, we have some introductory slides for all three systems today, and we will cover those beginning slides in more detail, this first system, and then, if possible, quickly skip past those for the remaining two. So first and foremost, I just want to lay out some main responsibilities or basic duties of the Drainage Authority, which Wright County, the board acting as the Drainage Authority today. It is your obligation to comply with and enforce the drainage law as spelled out here already in detail. And the drainage system itself is actually owned by those landowners that have been deriving some benefit from the system and have paid for the original construction or subsequent maintenance of the system over time. And any landowner can request action from the Drainage Authority, such as a repair. And it is your duty to consider that request and make a decision and act upon it if you so choose, and basically administer the system into the future so that it serves its purpose. One thing that we like to explain to drainage authorities is kind of the continuous life cycle, the management cycle of a drainage system. We're on step 1 today, and that is looking at the records. Step 2 we have is inspections to determine what is the condition of the system. Is it performing as it should be? Is it there to give those landowners the benefit that it was constructed for? And there's also a financing component, and that is the collection of funds to do the routine maintenance or other efforts being undertaken by the Drainage Authority to support the system. There's a policy and permitting aspect of the drainage system management as well. That is approving minor alterations to the system, setting some policy for how you respond to landowner requests on the different systems across the county. And then finally, step 5 we have listed is the actual project. So that would be the repair of the system as requested by landowners. And oftentimes, it may be obvious what needs to be done from looking at the ditch system in the field. Okay, there is a need for maintenance there, and as Mr. Cole pointed out, you do need to go back to the excuse me, the basis for as constructed design information to determine the extent of the repair that is actually in compliance with the drainage law. So the record process, which we're talking about today, can be tedious, but it is necessary to really define what you are allowed to do as the Drainage Authority. So this has been mentioned already today, but there is a requirement in the drainage law to for the auditor or for the Drainage Authority to keep an accurate index of proceedings and related documents in a readily usable, secure manner. Things such as the exhibits, maps, charts, profiles, plats, plans, specifications, and so on. And the provision in the drainage law that we are using today states that if those drainage system records are determined to be lost, destroyed, or incomplete, you may initiate the proceedings to reestablish the records that define the alignment, cross-section, and so on. So with this proceeding, we are attempting to basically legally define what the public drainage system is. And that is best described as the as constructed and subsequently improved condition. So you're going to hear that term often in the following slides. There's a few main elements of that as constructed, subsequently improved condition, or ACSIC, that make that up. And they include the alignment of the system, the beginning point and ending point, and how the system gets between those 2 points, or its alignment, and the cross-section, which is basically the dimensions of a open ditch or a tile. So what size is it? How wide is the channel? What diameter is the tile? Then also the profile. That is the grade or the slope of the system, either the tile or the open ditch. And again, this would also include the hydraulic structure locations or culvert or bridge crossings as well. So as brought up again a few minutes ago, what does this actually mean for the Drainage Authority? What defines where you can do work? As far as the spatial extents go, you are prohibited to doing work only on the public drainage system, not on other drainage system segments. It also defines the maximum level of repair to the as-built location. Any deepening or widening of a drainage system would constitute an improvement and trigger additional proceedings and regulatory considerations. So our process as the engineer for this reestablishment is summarized in the following steps. So first, we review the available records that are on file with the Drainage Authority. And number two, we do field survey to either validate what we see in those historic documents, or we fill in gaps with the field survey to establish that as constructed and subsequently improved condition, of which sits the alignment, cross-section, and profile or grade. And then lastly, we are also describing the right-of-way of the system. So those are the four major steps in this process. So now County Ditch 18 itself is in French Lake Township in the west central part of the county. It begins at Mud Lake, is the upstream end, and flows north to south, south to north for approximately 4,400 feet. And it is entirely open channel with a number of culvert crossings in there. It eventually enters the North Fork of the Pearl River just after it ends. And on the right-hand side of this screen, you see Mud Lake there on the south, and there's the county park on the east side of the lake. The yellow line is the alignment and goes north a little bit east, jogs to the northeast, and then enters a natural water course. That's the blue line for approximately a quarter mile or so before it enters the North Fork of the Pearl River. So the system was petitioned for and established in 1912. Those records are on file. And a redetermination was done back in 2014. So the alignment that you see up here is basically as it was as it was proposed in the petition. So no major or significant, really detectable changes from what we saw in the field to what was originally proposed. So the drainage area is the blue line, the blue outline here. That displays what land sends information, or excuse me, drainage to the system. And the yellow hatched area is the current benefiting parcels. So it's part of the viewer's process to determine which lands derive benefit from the ditch. So you see there is some additional area there that is not currently benefiting, but is in the watershed, on the east side of the watershed area. So now we have, in this slide, the engineering plan and profile. So what we do with this is basically show you the alignment and the grade of the as constructed, subsequently improved condition as we're recommending to the board. So the top half is the alignment that has engineering stationing describing the length of the system as it goes from the upstream to downstream end. It also shows on the bottom half of this page the as constructed profile or grade of the system. And we also show the existing profile, channel profile of the current channel. And in some cases there is a accumulation of sediment in the channel, and hence the need for maintenance potentially. To establish this solid line that sets the grade of the system, we often would prefer to have the design information from the original establishment of the system, or an as-built taken after it was constructed. So that is uncommon to have that on these systems constructed over 100 years ago. So in this case, we did not have any information regarding the grade or profile of the system. We use the method we call a soil boring that was taken during our field survey, and that is using this hand probe, hand auger to bore down into the sediment at the bottom of the ditch. And what we look for is a change in the material type. The accumulated sediment above the original constructed depth is often more organic in nature and darker than the material below it, which is a mineral or native soil that will be missing that organic material. And it may be more solid, and there's other characteristics that we look for as we do this process. And that tells us when that material changes, well, that was the constructed bottom of the ditch. So we've placed a number of these soil borings during our survey. On this system, there's 5 spaced approximately 1,000 feet apart, and we are considering those, all 5 points as we draw this as constructed, subsequently improved condition, profile, and grade, which is the solid line. Regarding the right-of-way of the system, that is a provision in the drainage law during the reestablishment process. So the system, when it was constructed, damages were awarded to those landowners for both the area physically occupied by the ditch, but also the area required for the construction of the ditch. It also would include the ability to access the system, to inspect and maintain the ditch. And oftentimes it's not described at all or very well to say what is this area that is associated with the Drainage Authority's ability to access for inspection and maintenance. So through this reestablishment process, we are documenting that there is a right, or there is a privilege to access the property through the Drainage Authority's duties. So we've used the channel depths, the reviewing historical aerials, and the topography surrounding the ditch to estimate a total width along the drainage system that would be necessary for the inspection and maintenance activity. And we've also displayed the parcels that intersect that area and put them in a figure inside of our technical report. And in this case, the width we've identified as 75 feet total width, so 37 feet on either side of the ditch.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Yes.
Row, R-O-W?
Yes, right of way.
Right of way, okay.
Another acronym for your.
I know. I should have known that one.
Say the width of the entire, the ditch system, and then isn't it 16 and a half feet on each side of the?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is the required buffer width on drainage systems that have been, well, benefits have been redetermined on recently. In the last 30 or 40 years, there is a requirement to, well, do I have that right, Chris? Maybe you can just elaborate on that a little better.
Sure. That often gets confused that the 16.5 feet would be the right-of-way of the ditch, but that really is just a provision in the law for required buffers for redeterminations, improvements, those sort of things. But it doesn't actually really set where your established width is. The width of the right-of-way that the Drainage Authority has to work within is really from what was established when they actually worked on the drainage system originally, the area that was needed, that was paid damages for, and that's what we determined here. We determined that footprint that they needed to go into in order to actually construct the ditch, and that gives you the corridor to work within.
Okay, thank you.
And that was done with soil borings?
No.
No, that was done based on our assessment of the area that would be necessary to do maintenance.
Does right-of-way apply to closed systems areas?
Yes, it would.
It would, okay.
So our recommendations on this system would be to adopt the records as the as constructed, subsequently approved condition as proposed within our report, and then continue with routine inspection and maintenance activities. So, thank you. That is my presentation for this system.
Okay, at this time, do any of the board members have any questions of Mr. Lewis? Okay, thank you. And again, then at this time, we'll hear from members of the public who wish to comment on the Ditch 18 system. I believe it was 18, right?
Yeah, it's 18. We're still on 18.
If you would like to comment on this particular system, you raise your hand and I'll recognize you and you come up to the podium. Go ahead, John.
Mr.
Chairman, members of the board, I just wanted to highlight to the board that you did receive a written comment from the Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District. I think it would be appropriate to read that into the record and provide some comment for it. So this is a letter dated October 13th, 2017 from Andrew Green, the wetland specialist from the Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District, to Mr. Robert Hivela. The Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District received notification that the Wright County Drainage Authority contracted Houston Engineering to complete the reestablishment of records for county ditches 18, 36, and 38, and will be holding public hearing on October 17th. We would like to provide the following comments as part of the record for the October 17th, 2017 hearing. We are aware that these ditch systems have not been repaired recently, and numerous wetlands are located throughout them. Some of these wetlands may be subject to mitigation requirements under the Minnesota Wetland Conservation Act and may require DNR Public Waters Works Permit or other permissions. Prior to conducting any work on these systems, we strongly encourage a meeting with the Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District staff to determine if mitigation is required for any wetland impacts as a result of future repairs. We appreciate your cooperation and look forward to working with the Wright County Drainage Authority moving forward. Sincerely, Andrew Green. Just the comment on this is, and again, this applies to all three ditches. And if you recall Mr. Lewis's report, one of the graphics he had up there showed the types 2 and 5, type 2 and 6 wetlands, and showed the types 3, 4, and 5 wetlands, or potential wetlands. And so, again, this process does not eliminate your requirements to comply with Wetland Conservation Act, Public Waters Law, or others. Or other regulatory requirements, and so I think we would have to acknowledge the Soil and Water Conservation District comments and would do so in appropriate findings depending on what action the board chooses to take today.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Mr. Cole, maybe you were the engineer, as long as you brought up about the different types of wetlands, maybe somebody would like to explain the differences on them. For the public, you know, what's the difference between a type 1 and a type 3?
Okay, so a type 1 and 2 wetland would be like wet meadow. A lot of pasture ground is that type, but it does not have a strong hydrologic regime. So it does have saturation within 12 inches of the ground surface for at least 14 consecutive days of the growing season, but it likely does not pond for an extended period. It does not have standing water. You get into type 3, 4, and 5 wetlands, and they typically will have standing water. They're more characterized like a cattail slough sort of thing. And so that's the big difference. And the reason why that's of consequence to a public drainage system is if you are a type 3, 4, or 5 wetland that is on a public drainage system that will be impacted by a repair, and that type 3, 4, or 5 wetland has reestablished itself for more than 25 years because of a lack of repair, then it would be subject to mitigation requirements. Whereas types 1 and 2 and 6, 7 wetlands, which are more of the wooded type drier wetlands, those 6s and 7s, they are exempted from the mitigation requirement if they are impacted by a repair of a public drainage system. So that's why we highlight that, and I know that that's the basis also for the SWCD's comments. In addition, you know, DNR has an interest in the public waters to the extent that they were already impacted by a public drainage system. There are some provisions in the code that allow for the repair of the public drainage system, but it still requires a level of coordination with the DNR.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the matter of Ditch 18, reestablishment of records? Okay. Does anyone have any written testimony other than the one that their attorney presented on Ditch 18? Okay. Seeing none, then no further comments out from the public. So at this time, I will close the public comment portion of the hearing, and it's back up here to the board for a motion or discussion, whatever the board is inclined to do. And then on page 5, there is a recommended motion about just about the bottom.
I'll move that we direct staff to prepare findings in an order consistent with the proceedings, including responses to all comments received through the public comment process, that the draft findings and orders be written to effect the reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system records consistent with the engineer's findings and recommendations. Direct recording of the order to reflect the the reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record, and that we recess this board's regular meeting on October 31st. No.
It actually means November 7th.
Who wrote this again?
I did, until I found out you supposed to.
On November 7th, or by adjournment to an appropriate time on the board's agenda, at which meeting we will consider findings and an order for the proposed establishment and correction of the public drainage system records.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll second that.
Motion by Commissioner Delighten, second by Commissioner Hewsome. I have a motion by Commissioner Delighten again, second by Commissioner Hewsome. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Same sign. The motion passes. Okay, so then at this time, we're going to recess the public hearing, and we have to make another vote. Is that correct, Craig?
So as to ditch 18, Mr. Chairman, you are in fact recessed until, based on the motion, until your November 7th regular board meeting. And that board meeting starts at what time? 9 o'clock. Okay, so 9 o'clock on November 7th, the ditch 18 matter is recessed until that time, or an appropriate time in your agenda that day, which will be in the agenda, at which time then you will consider a draft of findings consistent with the motion and that was approved.
So will our attorney be providing us that information?
I will work with the county attorney to ensure that those materials are prepared in time for your board packet prior to the 7th.
Okay. So then we will have, at this time, then the public hearing for ditch 36. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Oh, we had the motion and everything on 18 already.
Yeah, already.
So, all right.
Since I'm here, Mr. Chairman, I'll just
go ahead and start it off. Yep.
Ditch 36 is a drainage system located in sections 7, 17, 18, and 20 of Silver Creek Township. It generally flows northwest from a wetland north of 140th Street Northwest and eventually through Rice Lake, which is a public water. Public Waters designation 86-164P. The total drainage area to the public drainage system is approximately 2,000 acres, and those acres are located in sections 7, 8, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 of Silver Creek Township. Again, as with ditch 18, an inspection of the drainage system by the Drainage Authority staff revealed a lack of written documentation describing the elevations and grades throughout the system. Based on all of that information, on June 20th, 2017, you adopted a resolution to correct the drainage system record, and in doing so, you directed the engineer to investigate and report findings defining the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic structure information, and right-of-way of the drainage system. Notices for this hearing were mailed to the Commissioner of Natural Resources, the Executive Director of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and all property owners benefited or damaged by the drainage system on August 28th, September 28th, 2017, and then other interested parties were provided notice by publication in the Herald Journal. Again, evidences of all notices and the affidavits of publication and mailing are on file with the Drainage Authority. Again, the decision standard, which we just went through, and I'm abbreviating this because we went through a lot of this in the ditch 18 portion, and no one new has entered the room. The decision standard is whether, based on the proceedings herein and the evidence presented at this hearing and the testimony of the consulting engineer and the public, the board finds that the existing and reestablished records together define the alignment, cross-section, profile hydraulic structure locations, materials, dimensions, and elevations, and right-of-way of the public drainage system. Subject to any questions the board may have for me, I'm again followed by the engineer.
Okay, does anyone have anything? Okay, back up, Mr. Lewis, to do the presentation on ditch 36.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board.
Oh, did I turn that light off too soon for you?
Nope, this is good. Okay, so as I mentioned with 18, we will skip past some of the introductory slides. Jump right to details of County Ditch 36. So County Ditch 36 is located just southeast of the city of Clearwater. It does cross Interstate 94. And the system begins on the south side of 94 within the first half mile to mile, and then flows northward under 94, under County Road 25, through Rice Lake, and then into Fish Creek, which is a tributary to the Mississippi. In total, there's 13,600 feet of open ditch and several culvert crossings on the main trunk. And there is 2,300 feet of open channel ditch on 3 branches in total. So this system was petitioned for in 1917 and established in 1918. That's according to the records that are available with the Drainage Authority. And construction was completed in 1919 according to those records. And I will point out that there were 5 branches in the original documents. During our review of other information such as the historic aerials and current LiDAR topography or elevation data, and our survey, we really didn't find any evidence of 2 of the branches. That would be branches
2 and 3.
2 and 3. They're pointed out with arrows. So I wanted to just acknowledge that. The drainage area, again, is shown in green on this figure on the right, and the blue shaded area is our benefiting areas. So again, it's part of the viewer's process to determine what lands actually derive the benefit of the system. And it's not something that we review it in this process to reestablish the records. So now I want to jump to a video. So as part of this field survey, we did collect a drone video and aerial photography or drone video and aerial and pictures. And this was done to, I'm going to play it and kind of narrate and talk through it, but this was done to look for obstructions in the ditch. There was some, I just need to.
Still connected on the.
Okay. I'll sit over here so you can see it.
You know what's going on? It's on my screen.
Got it over here.
Nice little
Do you have
drone,
any?
too. That's what we saw out there.
5 minutes.
We saw, didn't we see this at our meeting?
Let me see. AC truck stop. Goes to the river from that point, but this one in fact up on County Road 75, right here. And this is where it flooded the road out.
Okay, we'll just continue on.
Yeah.
This is a great time to look at the profiles. Take a moment, you can see where they're going off the culvert.
If he doesn't get it.
Because
There, yeah,
application.
bathroom.
Say, Lee? Yep. While we're figuring this out, we're going to take a short break, say a 5-minute break here. to give everybody a break anyway, and you can get that worked out. So we're going to recess for about 5 minutes.
I didn't realize that it was that. I thought it was just switched.
You got your chance in the big seat.
Okay, we're gonna re-adjourn here, and we have the video ready to go, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
This better be good. So we took this video on this system and this system only because of the potential blockage that was suspected in the system. And I'm going to press the play button so you can see it as I talk. So there was some high water levels near County Road 75 where County Ditch 36 crosses. And we did the video to look for blockages and see if there was, some large debris or deeper activity in the system. And so we're flying southeast now, and you see right to the right, we're going to turn to the right here in a second. That's County Road 75. And you see the water levels there up against the road. And the outcome of this video was there is a lot of vegetation along this stretch of the ditch. And actually the open water that you saw there, that's not the alignment of County Ditch 36. That's actually just the water taking its own course because of the lack of open or lack of maintained ditch along 36. So, and I'll point that out location here in a minute. And there's 94 in the background there that we're coming up on it. And in this location as well, there really isn't a very well-defined channel either. So I'm going to pause that now and jump back to the slides.
Stuff you buy at Walmart.
So, Joe, the water there was blocked, so it would not go into Rice Lake, wasn't right?
It would go into Rice Lake just on a meandering path.
Right, but it does not have a clear path through.
Correct. So there's large amounts of vegetation that hold that water back and keep it from flowing efficiently into Rice Lake.
Okay, go ahead.
So on this system, we use the same method to determine the as-constructed profile and grades. As is the case with 18, there was not a historical document that displayed the design or constructed profile, elevations, or grade of the system. So we again use soil borings. Now on this sheet that I have in the lower portion of the slide, here we collected soil borings near some roadway crossings and established that as constructed grade using those. There was some difficulty in accessing the system during the field survey, just given the conditions, a lot of vegetation, a lot of wetlands, and we had a difficult time accessing the entire length of the system. But we collected enough points soil boring points to determine that to make a approximation of the as constructed grade. There's one specific area that I want to spend some time talking about, and that is the channel at the outlet of Rice Lake. 160th Avenue is right here, and here's Rice Lake. We collected the current channel elevations and also the soil boring elevations in that location, and pointed out that there was a noticeable hump or rise in the profile of the existing channel that was causing water to remain in the culvert at that 160th Avenue crossing. And that channel acts as the runout of the lake itself. And we took our soil borings in that location. We did not find that organic material on top of the constructed ditch bottom. We didn't see that transition from the organic material to the native mineral soil, which would have been the constructed bottom of the channel. Instead, we found just that mineral soil right at the surface. We we considered a few different things to define the as constructed profile in this location. And basically we analyzed that culvert a little closer and looked at the records that were on file with the county. We had a 1985 survey from the Minnesota DNR that collected information when the ordinary high water of that lake was established. We also saw that there was a record from 2001 where the DNR permitted a culvert replacement of that culvert that you see in the photo. So this is a photo taken during our survey in June. It's looking to the northwest, and that water that you see is the edge of the lake, and you see that there's standing water in the culvert pipe. 2001, that culvert was reinstalled at the same elevation as it was documented in 1985. So what we ended up doing was applying some judgment and saying that that culvert wasn't set below the channel, wasn't set below the channel runout elevation further downstream, which was 50 to 100 feet downstream is where that sediment hump was from this culvert crossing. So we use our judgment to say that the sediment accumulated in the bottom of the ditch, not from the sedimentation from upstream sources, but from potentially some bank sloughing or bank failures that raised the level of mineral or native soil in that ditch bottom. So we use the current culvert elevation, which has been at that elevation for some time. We use that elevation to set the as constructed and subsequently improved condition profile at this location, and gave it a positive grade, the slope away from that culvert, invert in the downstream direction.
I'm sorry, what size culvert was that? Looks like it's awfully small.
Right, I was thinking the same thing.
Yes, it is a 24-inch pipe.
Okay.
Minimum.
So it's not a large one. So on the next couple of slides, I just show the engineering drawings, and if there's any questions on specific areas, please feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I'll just give a little highlight of each one. So this is the most downstream location or segment of the system. There you see Rice Lake, right in the middle of the page, and to the left you see the endpoint of the system. And there is significant grade or elevation drop on the very downstream portion of the segment. It is flatter for several hundred feet immediately downstream of that 160th Avenue crossing. Then upstream, we show a flat profile across the lake. So again, there's the alignment and grade indicated on the sheet. And this is immediately upstream of that area. It shows the upper end or south end of Rice Lake, and it shows County Road 75 and 994. And this is the upstream end of the main chunk. The upstream end terminates at, Endicott Avenue, and the main chunk turns to the west and hits Endicott there after a few thousand feet south of 94. Then this is branch 1, which is a stub off of the main chunk just north of County Road 75. It is a short length, but we did find evidence of this channel in past historic aerials and in the LiDAR elevation data. And then here is branches 4 and 5. These go off of the main chunk south of 94, and they go to the east. We did again find evidence of those in the historic aerials. So similar to 18, we did review the right-of-way requirements and make an approximation of widths along the different lengths of the system. So the widths are based on what we observed for channel depths, and also in those historical aerials and the topography surrounding the ditch. And the parcels displayed here are simply ones that intersect that approximated right-of-way area with the system. So this slide shows our regulatory quick look at different wetland resources and DNR public waters in the system. So I did have a slide in 18. I think I did overlook it or miss it with the questions that came up there. But with this purpose, it's kind of outside of the base record reestablishment process or beyond what's necessary through the drainage law, but it's something that we threw in just to give the drainage authority, the board, some more information, at least of what's out there as you consider potential future actions on the system. So the red is the type 3, 4, or 5 wetlands, which you can see is basically covers the entire system south of Rice Lake or upstream of Rice Lake. And those would be wetlands, as Mr. Cole mentioned earlier, ones that would potentially require mitigation under the Wetland Conservation Act, the state's WACA law. And then the DNR public water body there, Rice Lake, it may require some coordination with them for repairs. So our recommendation is again to do a findings in order to reestablish the drainage system as we've described in our as constructed and subsequently improved condition details of the alignment, cross-section, and grades. And also for continued maintenance and inspection of the system. And also to consider the development of a repair report to review different alternatives for repair and to restore the drainage function of the system as it was originally intended. So, and that's it.
Okay. Thank you. And then does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Let's do Commissioner Houston first.
I was trying to remember what we had talked about earlier about Rice Lake. I mean, it's why it goes through, this length of lake, and essentially in 1918, it really wasn't a lake, right? I mean, so
yes, Commissioner,
it's not exactly a lake now, but
yeah, the historical aerials do show a smaller outline of the lake.
Yep. Okay.
Mr. Chair, the as-built and where the current level is on the culvert under 75, was it at the right grade?
Yeah, from our approximation, our determination, and our review, the culvert was there. It's at the same elevation as it was in 1985, which it was installed sometime. That culvert was installed sometime prior to 1985, but there wasn't a documented evidence of a different elevation. And we did take a soil boring immediately downstream of that culvert and did have a more typical soil boring result that matched or that resembled closely to what we ended up going with based on the culvert elevation.
So there is adequate fall there then. It does meet the original grade, the original.
Yeah, well, there's the sediment hump, but what we did, your question may be on our as constructed grade.
As constructed, so it does meet what it was, okay.
Yeah.
Chair?
Go ahead, Commissioner Line.
Yes.
I think you asked about County Road 75, right?
Yeah, 75.
Aren't you referring to county, or to?
160th?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought there was some
I was at
confusion
75, yeah. I was asking if 75 met the
Sure.
as-built.
Sure, so Matt, I can look up that slide here. Actually, I should have just went back. Let me just pull up that profile so we can look at it.
I thought especially when he said the hump, confusion there.
So the elevation at County Road 75 is at 950, 947, 946, and elevation downstream at 160th Avenue is actually above that County Road 75 culvert by several feet.
But that was based on your soil borings, that's the way it originally was too?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we did collect soil borings throughout the system. The access was difficult and understandably so because of the wet, marshy conditions, but we were able to collect enough soil borings through the other areas of the system to establish what we feel is as constructed grade and profile elevation. Just something to add, Chris?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a little bit. One thing that to point out here is that if you notice on the profile and the area that is to the south and east of Rice Lake, extending for, I believe it's almost a half mile, going all the way to County Highway 75, that is a dead flat grade that we have determined. And we did do some soil borings. There's one or two of them that were inconclusive, where we think that were darker, deeper pockets of organic material. But the soil borings we were able to get out there that were more conclusive match what we believe that profile to be, that it actually was constructed essentially with that flat profile coming back from that elevation at 160th Avenue at that culvert. So as Joe was indicating, we believe that Highway 75 culvert is actually lower than that as constructed grade. For whatever reason, it might have been over excavated at one time in the past when they installed the culvert there. Who knows? The other thing to keep in mind too is that this is based on the evidence that we do have our best interpretation of the as constructed condition. Again, ideally we would like to have a historic document that would have said the elevation is X, Y, and Z all the way along the drainage system, but we just do not have that. And so given the information we do have, this is what we feel the grade to be based on that documentation.
So you're saying from 75 to Rice Lake is pretty much flat across there?
That is correct, a flat grade.
Which does happen on there. There's a spot down on ditch 31 it's a short strip that's just flat.
It's actually inclines, because you said you went from 947 at 75, and then you're actually going up 7 feet on 160th from 75, correct?
Not 7 feet, it's actually maybe like
2 or 3 feet.
2 or 3 feet, okay, yes, you're going to 950 on the backside of the...
And that's just the culvert, that we believe that the channel bottom, from what we can determine, is closer to where that as constructed elevation is. We believe that that culvert is actually pushed a little lower than what that.
You don't think the culvert on 160th? You don't think the culvert on 160th Street was set high at one point?
Given our information we have now, we do not believe that to be the case. And again, keep in mind that elevation 160th Street is still a couple feet lower than where that hump is right now that is controlling the water elevation.
No, I got that.
Lake. So
but the culvert at 160th Street is higher than the one at 75?
That is correct, yep.
So then there's nobody who would have constructed the ditch that way, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and also keep in mind those culverts were not constructed as part of the drainage system. So those culverts actually are not really part of the drainage system. They're a private, quote-unquote private, meaning, you know, the township owns that culvert. It's their culvert in the system. It came after the drainage system. And similarly with the county culvert was placed after the drainage system was already constructed. So that's one issue that you get into a lot of times, is that these culverts weren't necessarily placed at the bottom of the original ditch. They were placed sometimes either higher or lower, depending on what the condition of the ditch was at that time.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Out of curiosity, I'm just trying to figure, I know it's flooding or being an issue on County Road 75, but it really doesn't seem to affect farmers or anything, which would have been the original design of this ditch, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the primary reason, Commissioner Daladin, is with the systems built in the early 1900s was to accommodate agricultural activity. In this case, you know, that was likely the case as well. You know, that could have been spelled out in the petition. I guess I don't recall what that information is at the top of my head, what the purpose of this specific system was.
I'm just wondering if it needs to be improved, or if we could just eliminate it. But I guess that's a subject for another day. I'm trying to figure out what the benefit of it is today compared to what it was. And that might be something that we'll have to look into further.
Okay. Does anyone else on the board have any questions of Mr. Lewis? Okay, seeing none, we can put the lights back on me. Does anyone in the public have any comments on this system on ditch 36? Mr. Kolb.
Again, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, just noting for the record that we have the same letter from the Wright County Soil and Water Conservation District as was read into the record in its entirety in the ditch 18 portion of the proceeding. I feel the need to read it again just to note for the record that it is here.
Okay. Thank you very much. So anyone from the public have anything in writing that they would like to present? Seeing nothing, no further comment, we're going to close the public comment at this time and bring it back up here to the board. It's back up here, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll make a motion that we direct staff for findings and an order consistent with the proceedings, including response to all comments received through the public comment process, that the draft findings in order be written to effect the reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system records consistent with the engineer's findings and recommendations. Direct recording of the order to reflect the reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system record, and that we recess this hearing to the board's regular meeting on November 7th, or by adjournment to an appropriate time on the board's agenda, at which meeting we will consider findings in an order for the proposed reestablishment and correction of the public drainage system records.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Delisle.
Second that.
Second by Commissioner Vetch. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous. Now we are up to ditch 38. Mr. Cole, want to introduce us to this system?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and I know you will receive some substantial comments regarding this particular system, and I am not going to comment on those. I'll just kind of wait until that happens, and if there's any questions the board has about that, we can discuss them at this time. Wright County Ditch 38, this drainage system is located in sections 34 and 35 of Marysville Township and section 3 of Woodland Township. Generally flows northeast from a segmented wetland south of US Highway 12 between Montrose and Waverly. The system eventually outlets to a wetland complex east of Clementa Avenue, southwest, and north of 55th Street southwest. The total drainage area of the public drainage system is approximately 884 acres. Those acres are located in sections 33, 34, and 35 of Marysville Township and section 3 and 4 of Woodland Township. The drainage area is predominantly developed for agriculture and residential land uses with a small amount of open forested areas. Again, based on an inspection of this system and the system's records by staff, it was determined there was a lack of written documentation describing the elevations and grades throughout the system. As some members of this board might recall, in 2013, the board conducted a redetermination of benefits on this system. This was the second redetermination of benefits on this system conducted since its establishment. The first redetermination of benefits occurred in the 1960s and included lands that were not included as benefited in the previous determination of benefits, or actually in the establishment. One of the questions that came up from your viewers in the 2013 redetermination of benefits was, what is the actual extent of this drainage system? Which was a prelude and kind of highlighted the purposes for proceedings as you ordered them. The engineer's report came in. It's dated August 10th, 2017. Your order initiating the records reestablishment process was entered by resolution on February 14th of 2017, and at that time you directed the engineer to prepare the report of findings defining the alignment cross-section profile hydraulic structure information, and the rights-of-way of the drainage system. Notice of this proceeding was given by mail to the Commissioner of Natural Resources, the Executive Director of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and all property owners benefited or damaged by the drainage system by 2 separate mailings, one on September 25th, 2017, and another on October 5th, 2017. Other interested parties were provided notice by publication in the Herald Journal, and again, evidence of notices, including the affidavits of publication and affidavits of mailing, are on file with the Drainage Authority. You are operating under the same decision standard as the last 2 systems that you've discussed. And again, that is whether the evidence presented at this hearing and the testimony of the consulting engineer and the public, after hearing all of that, you find that the existing and reestablished records together define the alignment, cross-section, profile, hydraulic structure, locations, materials, dimensions and elevations, and the right-of-way of the drainage system. And subject to any questions the board may have, Mr. Chairman, I'm again followed by the engineer.
Okay, some questions of John? Seeing none, okay. Joe, you're back up again.
Thank you. So I will just jump right to the details of County Ditch 38. It is located between the cities of Montrose and Waverly. It begins on the upstream end near Highway 12, actually on the south side of Highway 12 between those 2 cities. It consists of approximately 8,000 feet along its length, half of which is open channel, the other half tile, the upper half of the system being tile. So the system was petitioned for in 1918 and established in 1918, and records indicate that the construction was completed in 1919. There is some documents going back to 1926 that indicate that there was an extension that was requested in 1926, but there's no record of its approval or details of where the extension actually was. I will mention that, you know, through the Drainage Authority's management of the different systems in the county, they are utilizing a database application developed by Houston Engineering called Drainage DB, and that is the source of these records. They've been reviewed previously and migrated to the system so that, you know, people like us can access them if given that ability. In 1969, there was a redetermination that took place that Mr. Kolb mentioned, and then that identified additional parcels beyond the initial benefiting lands. And those additional parcels were to the north and east of the system. In 1979, there was a minor realignment where the yellow arrow is to accommodate some ponds being constructed for the mobile, as part of the mobile home park, just north of Highway 12. And there is the extension, that is the blue line. You see the yellow dash line on the right-hand side, on the figure on the right-hand side. The yellow dash line is the originally constructed ditch, the originally proposed ditch. The purple line is what is out there today, which resembles what was constructed, actually constructed in 1919. And then the blue line, as I mentioned, is the extension. So the drainage area is shown in green on the figure. Now, we don't show the benefiting areas. That wasn't a readily available GIS layer at the time. We completed this report. And again, it's the viewer's process to determine what lands actually derive the benefit. And as Mr. Kolb mentioned, that was a driving factor to initiate this record reestablishment proceedings in this case. So this system is unique compared to the other 2 that we actually did have a original plan and profile drawing as was proposed with the original establishment. This system, in red here, we have the area that shows the design plan. And green I've highlighted, just traced that alignment So you see that it begins at the south end. Let me turn on the next graphic. The orange line is Highway 12 for reference, and it begins on the upstream end here, just on the south side of what is now Highway 12. And the original proposal petition plan was to parallel that highway and then turn northeast and eventually cross the railroad and on the west side of Clementa Avenue. So we know that from the records that isn't exactly what got built. There's an engineer's report that documents a revision to the alignment between what is now the mobile home park and the railroad crossing down to Highway 12. We know that it was straightened as a cost-saving measure while still providing the same original intended benefit and drainage. There's also a minor realignment. There's also a minor realignment, as I mentioned, that took place in 1979. That's documented, and it was to accommodate the mobile home park. On the downstream end, the records do indicate that there was an extension that occurred. That's largely based on the 1969 redetermination. The properties were added to the north and east of the original benefiting land. So the system now ends, it changed from the west side of Clementa Avenue to the current proposed endpoint, which is on the eastern property boundary of the property just immediately east of Clementa Avenue. And historic aerials do show ditch excavation in this property. So again, we use soil borings for the open channel portion of this system to document or to determine that as constructed profile and grade. On this slide, we show 4. So these are spaced approximately 1,000 feet. There's one more on the next sheet that I don't show here, but we use those points to establish, again, the profile and grade. And we did see that change over from the accumulated sediment, organic in nature, that material down to the mineral or native soil at the constructed bottom of channel. So again, the engineers plan and profile drawings indicate the alignment on the top half of the drawing and the grades on the bottom. And I've already reviewed or explained the system alignment there. You will notice that it does cross Clementa multiple times. And the just west of the first Clementa crossing is where it transitions from open channel to tile. So this is tilted, so we'll see it better on the next slide. This one is more closer to north, being towards the top of the drawing, but we have the, you can't see my cursor, right? So this is where the transition is from tile upstream to channel below that location. And the tile, we were able to identify or find in the field with the help of the drainage inspector to shoot the either top of the tile pipe or the bottom of the tile pipe. And I do want to just explain a little bit how we arrived at this alignment shown in our drawings. There was some belief that the actual alignment turned south, generally in this area, and ended at a culvert crossing under Highway 12. We did have records, those historic records that said, well, no, it actually extended all the way to further to the southwest. And after some additional field work, we did actually find some tile both on the north side and south side of Highway 12. So we used kind of a process to project out where we could see the tile in this location. We started looking by extending the line down to Highway 12. So we were able to, with the tile probe, find that culvert find that tile under Highway 12.
What size was that tile? And was it old clay or has that been upgraded?
Cement, I think.
Yeah, it's a 14-inch tile. I believe it's clay, but there are sections that have been repaired that would be plastic, I believe.
Yeah, when we ran the camera through, from underneath the entire trailer court and under the railroad and...
No, he's talking, I'm currently talking about on by 12.
Oh, at 12, I don't know, but yeah.
That's what I'd ask.
It's cement though.
12.
Sure, there was some records that indicated that the MnDOT, when they reconstructed the Highway 12 back in 99 or 2000, that they were going to replace it with a concrete pipe. So, we actually didn't dig that up and find it. We simply probed down to feel that where that tile was and record the depth of it or how deep it was buried. So for the right-of-way of the system, similar to the other two systems we've looked at today, we went through a process to determine what area would be reasonably necessary to access the system for both inspection and maintenance. In this case, we do have some tile. So we approximated a maintenance requirement width based on, similar to the open channel, but we're also accounting for how deep is the tile into the ground, and that would affect the area required to do something with that system. And we do show the parcels that intersect that right-of-way boundary as we've defined. And you will note that, I think you all know this, but the alignment actually crosses the mobile home park. And it may be something that in the future you consider a realignment of that location to make access and maintenance less problematic. And from a regulatory standpoint on County Ditch 38, we identified again the waters on the DNR Public Waters Inventory. That is, in this case, the public water just on the south side of Highway 12. And then in a few other locations, there are several type 3, 4, or 5 wetlands that again would require potentially some mitigation under certain conditions during a repair. The recommendations on the system would be again to do a findings and order to reestablish the drainage system record following drainage law, and also for continued inspection and maintenance on the system, and also to consider the development of a repair report to restore the drainage of the system.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Could you go back to that one screen that you just had up there? Just before it crosses over the railroad tracks, Charlie, wasn't there a lateral that was connected into there that wasn't part of the drainage system, but it was a private one?
We have people testify, I'm sure when it comes up, but I think you're right, yes.
I have no further questions.
Okay. Is anyone else from the board? Okay. So at this time, we'll take public comment on Ditch 38. Anyone wishing to comment, please raise your hand and I'll recognize. Go ahead. If you could come up to the podium, then we'll be able to hear you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Susan Weens. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Law Group. I represent Graham and Ellen Sones in this proceeding. I'm hoping that you have some written submissions that I provided. If you don't, I have some copies of them that have the color pictures that are easier to see. So as I make my comments, I can provide you a copy.
I'll have them.
We are asking that the engineer's report not be relied upon, that it either be redone, reassessed, because the Sones's belief and our argument today, which you've heard before from the Sones, is that the Ditch 38, as it was constructed, ended far south and west of their property. And when you look at in fact, when you look at this photograph, the original ditch was constructed and it ended, I can't show you on that one, but it ended here and didn't make its way up. And you can tell from the historical record that the viewers, when they did their viewing report, they didn't assess benefits to section 35, which is up in that corner. 35 is here, this section is 35. They didn't assess benefits in there because they had shortened the ditch in how they had constructed it. So you look at the public records on your website, and it indicates that the county board then approved a ditch that looks much like this one. But there was an amendment, and the engineer and the county board, when it adopted the final ditch construction, shortened it and took it out of Section 35. And the public record supports that. Even the county's own reviewer of the records and the summary of them recognizes that that's what happened. So the question then is, when the ditch ends south of 55 and east of Clementa, of where their property is, the only way that the county can reestablish records for this ditch is that section of the ditch had to have somehow now been incorporated into the ditch system. And that process is a regulatory process for an improvement. That ditch was extended for quite a ways, and that was an improvement to the original ditch 38. In order for that to happen, it's a very regulatory process, and I set it out in my materials. I won't go through it again. But there isn't any evidence in the record that that ever happened. A redetermination of benefits is not an improvement to the ditch process. So there was a redetermination of benefits. No, I guess nobody was objecting to it then, but it wasn't actually part of the public drainage system. It was never made part of the public drainage system in the formal way that the statute requires. And even in 2013, if you look at maps that the county was looking at, as it was looking at the trailer park problems and and mapping out where this ditch ended, even in 2013, the county was looking at the ditch ending south of 55. And it's in my materials, if you look at Exhibit B. The county was looking at it as ending south of Soane's property. Their neighbor was concerned about water coming from the south and affecting his property. And so the county, when it looked at his complaint, the map that was drawn didn't even go into the Soane's property. So there has been a question for years and years and years about where did this drainage ditch end? And the public record supports the argument that the ditch was never properly incorporated into the ditch. That northern section wasn't properly incorporated into the ditch. So a reestablishment of records can't cure that problem. And the premise of the engineer's report is based upon he bases it on his proposed fact that drainage ditch was constructed as approved all the way through the north to the Soane, and that's incorrect. And relying upon a report that has such material inaccuracies is, is an appealable issue for us if the Drainage Authority goes through with relying upon that. The other thing, the technical aspects of the engineer's report, as it concerns Soane's property, there was only 2 borings taken, one at the very edge of each side of the property. It does not demonstrate that a ditch was dug through that area. It doesn't demonstrate any soils being excavated. It doesn't demonstrate any banks. It's wholly inaccurate to demonstrate that that's where the ditch went, and we have experts who will say that. So there's huge issues around where this ditch ends and how it was originally constructed. And there isn't any solid evidence in the record to support the position by the engineers. So we ask that there either be more work done, that we reach a compromise somehow on the ditch, but that you reject this report and not rely upon it in your determination. Most of my other comments are all in that report, and I'm happy to take comments. Questions?
Yes, if I could. So your contention that the ditch would end like
here
before it even gets to Salonic's property?
Well, I think the ditch ends, the yellow line that was drawn?
Yeah.
That was what was originally constructed back in the 1919. Okay. So, and the redetermination of benefits did in 1969. Maybe this ditch, sort of happened, but it wasn't ever, so what I'm saying is, far south of Sonus's property
Okay.
is where that ditch.
So then how would it be then, I guess, how would you explain then that Salonics are benefited properties on the ditch road? We do have the records. I mean, we don't have all the records. That's what we're trying to do here. But we can go by the benefited landowners as well. I mean, as well as the soil barns. We're trying to put this all together, but the Shones property is on the benefited tax rolls, and it not tax rolls, the benefited acres, and so is Salonics. I mean, and it's been there for years, and there's been no objection ever to that.
Well, a couple responses to that. There is no public record on creating an easement, a ditch easement on their property. And the process of establishing benefits back in 69 or even in 2013, they objected in 2013. They weren't around in 1969. So, but a property can benefit from a ditch and not actually have it on its property. So the determination of benefits doesn't necessarily mean that a ditch was on the property that was benefited.
Right.
But that would be the only thing that would make sense on this piece of property, because it's all downhill.
Well, I think if you look, I don't think I have it with me, but there was a map of benefited properties that I had seen in the public record. I can find it for you and send it to you, but it showed a number of properties that didn't have the ditch actually lying on its property. I don't think that's an unusual situation, that a benefited property.
No, I mean, but that makes sense, and Commissioner Devine pointed out, if you have higher ground and the ditch is down here, you still may be benefited, but it's just be preposterous almost to have the ditch go through your property and then be on the benefited rolls and say that, it wouldn't make sense to me.
There are public ditches and there are private ditches. So a property can have a private ditch that's benefiting its property, but that doesn't mean it's part of the public ditch system.
But how would that, okay, the water's coming to the Shones property, it's actually coming to the Salonics property too, before going on to Shones's, but how would it be that they could possibly be benefited by dumping water on them if we're not going to have a venue, a way to get that water off of their property?
Well, I think that's a question for today and for the future about how to remedy the problem that we have. But the problem still exists, that this particular property, I don't think legally was ever included within, I don't think you can actually say that that part of the ditch is part of the public ditch system. It may be a private ditch, may be benefiting their property, it may be helping the Salonics because they're good neighbors, but it's not part of the public ditch system. I think you have a difficult time with that.
But they're on the benefited rolls.
I understand that, but I'm not saying that that was an appropriate decision even back then.
All right. Okay. Does anyone else, one second. Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Mr. Dusky, come on. Oh, you know what? And you did say your name and stuff for the record?
Yes.
Very good. A good attorney did that already. So even though we know you, Mr. Dusky, you
need to open up the public portion of this comment.
Oh, do you know what? Did I not? Yeah, I thought I did open the public comment. I said open to the public, yeah. So, okay. Yes.
Okay. I'm Keith Dusky. We're at the beginning of the ditch, but
And what's your address, Keith?
5700 Cushing Avenue Southwest.
Thank you.
And the attorney's comment about not being on the record, she's absolutely correct. But my dad and neighbors were on, at that time, they had their own ditch committee. And there was one county commissioner on the ditch committee. And my neighbor, Pat Salonic, and I sat in Bob's office that one whole day and went through everything. And the county board meeting minutes where this all would have been done are missing. And this is one of the reasons why we asked for the redetermination, because them minutes are missing when this would all been added. But if, like Charlie points out and the whole board is, if they're being assessed to it, at one time, they had to have been added to it. I mean, there's no way you can assess somebody something if they weren't added to that ditch. So I guess, I just believe that it goes all the way through their property, really. And then I have one other question.
Well, direct the questions up here, though.
But it was I can't think of
the attorney.
The attorney's name, but he said about if it's been like water for 25 years, we probably got to go through the DNR. What if we've been fighting this since the early 70s and the water's still sitting there? We still got to go through the DNR if we want to drain it?
Well, that'll be one for us to come up with down the road. Thank you, Mr. Dusky. Does anyone else have comment on this issue, on the ditch 38? Go ahead, come on up. Please state your name and address for the record.
Graham Sones, 5324 Clementa Avenue, Southwest, and I appreciate the fact that we get the opportunity here to get something straight here. We need to figure out where the beginning and where the end of this ditch occurs, and careful consideration has to be given to where that ditch ends. And careful consideration, in my opinion, is not looking at a ditch record and saying, well, here's Eddie and Bev Reuter, and they say they've got 30 acres benefited. In this case, where does that 30 acres exactly occur? Where is that exact sub-drainage watershed that contributes to that benefit? In this case, all there is a 69 roll saying that there's a benefited landowner, but looking back at the historic documents of the line that's on the well, in relationship to the line that's shown now, clearly shows when you look at 1940s, which is only 21 years after the original establishment in 1919 or the construction, it clearly shows no ditching activity on the far end where that type 3 DNR wetland on our property. Now, it did not even show anything on the property at all. And in fact, not until Reuter bought the property in 1956, and then subsequent years thereafter where they modernized the house and they pulled in some cattle and they've got an actual farm operation going, do I see, according to my expert, and I'm a landscape architect, I look at aerials all the time, it looks as if perhaps Reuter dug a waterway to water his cattle. And at one point in the 60s, it almost looks as if that waterway was dammed up on one end so that they would have water through the winter. And beyond that point, I see no indication of any activity in the greater water body, the basin type 3 wetland, which was a stopping point this past spring when we found an excavator on our property without a permit. And I went down and I talked to him and I said, you know, what are you doing here? Well, we have, you know, business to do. We're going to dig this ditch now. And it was news to us. My wife called the county and asked, where is the county's permits for this work? Well, the county had no permit. I had to go down and handle this situation. I opened the cab door of the tractor, and there was our contractor that had dug our septic system. And, oh, there you are. And in any event, I said, you need a permit for this. And he says, no, I don't. I work for the county, and this has all been arranged already. And I said, okay, do you care who pays for this? And he says, no. And I said, all right, I'm paying for this. Is that okay? I said, you're working for me now. He said, fine. I said, well, then Mike Young and I decided there was a point right over here where we had enough fall for the water to get through. And that's where I pointed my finger. I said, start there, and I'm paying you. You're going back. It cost me $500, but I am still not on the rolls. Is that understood? I paid for that. So it's a shame that we have to stand here and defend public waters with our own money. And we did buy that land. I'm willing to do it. But to have the county come along and say, no, this ditch goes all the way through and because we want to end up downstream. We're looking beyond the Soneses. Think about it. I've got our abstract right here, going back to when Minnesota became a state. On our property, there is nothing, no record in the 1960s at all of any kind. No sale, no loans, no improvements, nothing.
No drainage.
No drainage easement.
Thank you.
And I'm Ellen Sones at the same address, 5324 Clementa. And I just want to reiterate, in my career experiences, I've looked at thousands and thousands of aerial photos. I administered Wetland Conservation Act for Hennepin County for 15 years. And in that time, I looked at thousands of photos. And I mention that because we personally, Graham and I looked at over 40 aerial photos of our property. And we have a number of ones that we could present to you. None of the photos show any ditch ever that extends all the way to our easterly property line. That has never been the case, and I want to emphasize, aerial photos do not lie, do not lie. So when your engineer says that they've reviewed historic photos or historic documents, the photos, if they took those into consideration, would have clearly shown that there is no ditch, and historically there never has been one. So just wanted to make that point. I also want to mention the soil boring data seems a bit unclear, incomplete in my opinion. I mean, I've served on technical evaluation panels. I've delineated numerous wetlands, so I know how to delineate a wetland, and I know what you're supposed to be looking for. And I realized they were only looking for the clay layer and assuming that there was a ditch there before, and that's why they wanted to locate the depth of that clay layer. There's nothing in the supporting documentation that they have that shows what they found above that. Was that parent organic soils, hydric soils that would have been there originally for hundreds and thousands of years? There's no data that supports what else they found. They just find where the clay layer is on 2 locations on our property. And that, to me, is not a clear indication of what was historically there. It's very incomplete in my opinion. And we've had a water resource engineer look at this as well and says the soil boring information is incomplete. There's no hydrologic study. You know, it's an incomplete report. You don't have enough data there to support the line that's drawn. So I just wanted to make that clear for the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any comment? Come on back up.
State my name again. Dusty? Okay. I don't know how to put this. I guess I've never looked at historical records or photographs, but I've lived where I'm at ever since I was born. And in 1969, when the ditch was dug out, I personally watched them dig through. So, I mean, I know it was dug, put it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have something, Chris? Or?
If it'd be
yeah, let's see if there's anyone else in the public. Yes, come on up, please. If you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, I'm Marilyn Gates, and I live at 2252 US Highway 12, Southwest Montrose. My property is adjacent to the 12 High Mobile Home Park. There is a private tile that's about 200 feet from my driveway, my easement, that drains into ditch number 38. There also is another tile that was put in by the county, and it's running under Highway 12 coming from Woodland Township. and that also brings water into that low spot. Now, I'm not sure what's going on. There was a change of land shapes and contour, and that is bringing more water into the area. The tile, I believe, I've been on this location for 50 years. It was part of the Socorro property. That land was farmed and grew a crop. Now it's the water is being dammed up, and there's now cattails there. I have a second problem with the 12 High Mobile Home Court is having trouble with their storm shelter, so they're draining the water under a culvert that I put in for the easement to drain to that culvert, and they are draining their water into that low spot also. So it seems like the tile is hardly big enough to handle the influx of water that's coming in since the contour of the land has been changed. Also, behind me, I've got about, maybe 500 feet to the railroad, and they proceeded to put raise the land and put in a kind of a domed land on it, and so the water can't physically land drain where it should be draining to, so I'm kind of being dammed up, you might say. So I just wanted to make you aware that there is a tile that is working at this time, but it's small.
Okay.
So, thank you.
And if you wanted to stay for a second, because I know we did have a camera that we sent in from the mobile home park to the northeast under the tracks and stuff, and we actually found that where that tile
the tile comes up.
Right. We were concerned that possibly it was obstructing, it was broken or whatever, but at that point anyway, the guy that was running the camera said if every installation was done like that, he said it'd be perfect. So it was a very good job. But what the tile does upstream, we don't know. And then also, anytime there's a lot of water in the Highway 12 area, the tile is so full. I mean, it's moving, but you can hardly see it move because there's other problems with the system, and that's, like I said, we're not getting into the repair today, I guess, but
right,
that's something that we'll have to look at.
Yeah, it takes sometimes 4 to 5 days before you see any change in water level with the tile running.
Because that tile probably would not even flow in there until the water level in that 24-inch tile gets down a little bit, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else in the public have any comment? Go ahead, Graham. I should say Mr. Shones.
Thank you, but I would just wanted to comment after Mr. Dusky said that he saw with his own eyes, and I don't doubt that he saw activity probably on our property, but my question to him would be is what was the arrangement for that work? Where's the public record that says that it took place?
Yeah.
What was his age at the time? How many people told him what was being done and why? Or was it just that he saw somebody digging and did not know who was paying for that? Possibly a private landowner had been taking the contractor aside and saying, I'm willing to have my ditch be dug here because it would benefit my own property for my own purposes, not for the public. And here I am, I'm willing to take the public's water, but, from the public ditch. But at this point, I need to take care of this myself. And I feel that that's our standpoint, and I feel that that's historically what was the standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sure, if you want to come on. Looks like we're almost done here, so.
Yeah, I was 17 at the time, But like I stated earlier, my dad was part of the ditch committee. And I was on the farm my whole life, so I knew how ditches worked and stuff, and he had basically, he didn't even have to explain to me, because he told me what they were, what the committee had decided. And it was all, at that time, was all being paid for by the ditch. It would be assessed to every ditch owner. And it wasn't, it was the same guy that started by the railroad in Clementa and went underneath and come all the way around. It was the same guy that dug the whole thing. He was on the tax roll.
We'll try to keep it up here, but okay. All right, thank you. Come on back up. Yeah, try to, when you're speaking, try to address the board up here rather than individuals. Less arguments that way, right?
Just one last comment about whether there was some ditching or something happened on the property. Even back in 1969, the drainage law, the drainage code, still required that if you're going to extend a ditch, you had to go through this formal process. It was almost as rigorous as it is today. So if a group of people from the county decided that they were going to go extend a ditch, and they did it, they still didn't do it under their proper authority of the laws. So even if it happened, it didn't happen in accordance with what is necessary to establish that as a public ditch.
Well, and that's, I think, that's the question. That's why we're here today, because we're trying to reestablish those records. Right. It would be nice if we could find that golden box that, that has all the records in it, so.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they did find some of them.
Yeah, there's one page, I think, yeah.
There's evidence of something happening in 1969.
Yeah.
But there still isn't evidence of an improvement project. You need to find evidence of an improvement project, not just that there was some redetermination of benefits. That's the missing key. That's the important part. There was no improvement project ever once this ditch was originally constructed. And without finding that piece, that's the problem, I think.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Does anyone else have any comment? Any other, Mr. Kolb? Should I ask for a written? Oh, you're going to have that.
Again, I'm just coming up to highlight for the board, and we can talk during discussion later. But just to highlight the board that as to ditch 38, you did receive an identical letter from the Soil and Water Conservation District. It's already been read into the record in the proceedings for 18. There's no need to read it again, but just so that the record reflects that that letter was received as part of these proceedings as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any written comment that they would like to submit to the board at this time? Okay, and any other further comment on this before it comes back up to the board? And I guess I would like maybe to either ask Mr. Kolb or Mr. Kreiser, we have a little bit of conflict on this one, if what way you would like us to proceed, I guess,
Let me try something here, Mr. Chairman, before we get started. This will be helpful. All right, so there's no question that the records here are ambiguous. In fact, they are missing in many ways, and much of what we've heard goes to the fact that those records are missing or incomplete, and that's why we have this evidentiary proceeding and we accept all of these things. So now what the board has to determine, the board has to determine, based on all of the evidence it's heard, what is the most likely extent, alignment, dimension, grade of this public drainage system. And really the question here, based on the most obvious objection, has to do with this section of the ditch here to here. Nobody complaining about this being part of the public system. We know that the original record basically shows the originally contemplated ditch system ending at this point, but sometime after that, more was constructed. And so the testimony of Mr. Dusky is relevant to that. So you have to decide that. So typically, you can decide today. You can go ahead and recess this to a date, time certain, or some future time certain, so that you can consider it or direct it back to the engineer or back to your staff to answer some specific questions for you. Or you can decide here today, based on the evidence that you have and the testimony you've received, that you believe that this, what's being portrayed here, is the actual alignment of the ditch. And then we can work on preparing findings to support, based on the record that's before you, we can pull out the items in the record that are relevant to support that decision. I don't know how the board feels. I mean, typically right now you would go into some level of board discussion, maybe asking some questions of staff to try to clarify testimony or to try to understand kind of what your obligations or options are here. But ultimately, you have to make a decision based on the evidence presented as to what the extent of the ditch is. You have a recommendation from your engineer, and obviously you've taken substantial comment today. So.
And we have not closed public comment yet, but I just wanted to, and I don't know.
You can think out loud.
I'm trying to read between the lines here, and the Joneses I've known Ellen, I used to be on a board with her, and very nice people, but I just know that. And they want to keep their wetland, is what I understand from conversations outside of today's meeting. And I think that's a totally, I think we could work out something, I think, to accommodate that down the road. But I said it's really has a lot to do with the proceedings today. But if the Joneses weren't the owners of that property, and we had somebody to come in that wasn't so nice and said, no, you're not going to come on my land, and then the water backs up as it was about a year ago. It backs the ditch system up. So, but I don't think, as long as the drainage authority here has that culvert on Clementa at the bottom of the culvert, I don't see a problem, except if there was further sedimentation downstream, at some point we may have to go on the other side of the marsh that's in the Shones property and maybe take some out, or put a control structure in there or something, as long as it stays below the culvert. I said I'm a believer in private property rights, and if they want to keep the marsh and it's not a problem to anybody else, I think that should be able to be accommodated. But it's like I said, it's maybe putting the cart before the horse here. I don't know.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, let me make an observation on that. And this actually is something that Mr. Jones brought up himself. I admire somebody who's as good of a neighbor as Mr. Jones is, because
very nice people.
When the excavator showed up, he understood that there were property owners further upstream from him that were having a problem, and understood the necessity of at least getting the water to flow. And so when he discussed, he being out there with your ditch inspector and finding a point where there was enough grade to match the line and to make things work, I mean, he was very neighborly and very accommodating. That's a great thing. And the fact that he paid for it himself, what a benefit to the rest of the drainage system, right? I think it's a good thing. So it talks to the Sones' character. But where you're going is there a point on the Sones property where, in order to protect the outlet for everybody else, we could end excavation, or we could end the official alignment? So, I mean, I'm just guessing here, if that point is, say, right here, because if we look at I gotta get the other map up here, we'll find it. All right, so station basically 0 is the very bottom of the ditch, and station 12 is the downstream end of the culvert under Clementa. So this basically from here to here is the Stones' property. Mm-hmm. And so is it necessary to maintain the ditch all the way to there to get the water to flow? Yeah, I think what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, is it's not. And so it may be that both the engineers and staff could work with the Stoneses and the Stoneses attorney to try to find a location that's less concerning for them, while at the same time addressing what I think this board's concern is the Drainage Authority, is that you've got to use the full record, find out what the ditch is, and ultimately want to protect the function of that ditch for all of the benefited owners, and that would mean protecting some level of outlet. So just for consideration or the board's discussion purposes, I think that's where you're going, Mr. Chairman, and it reflects back to something that, you know, obviously the Stoneses have already talked about in terms of finding that location. So it may be possible to figure something like that out. I don't think you're going to do it today.
Before I'm going to, 1 second, Chris, but I think by what we're doing today, what we did with the other two ditches, would not hinder or stop us from doing that agreement or working something out down the road. And I think, I can't speak for the board, I can speak for myself, but I know this board pretty well. We're not going to trample on somebody's property rights when we don't have to. That's my point. Commissioner Houston.
I guess my comment or question is, so if you're taking an action down the road to vacate part of the ditch, so you determine...
No, that wouldn't be what we do.
You wouldn't?
No.
You would not vacate
No,
that?
I don't think...
It could be, okay, so that could be an outcome.
Okay.
If the board were to say, we're going to go ahead and reestablish the records, and our belief is that the ditch ends here, then maybe you would come later on and you would partially abandon.
But the problem with that is, though, Mr. Kolb, is on the other side of the wetland that's behind the Schoen's house property. Well, right, but there's the wetland. If that, before it gets to the natural waterway down there, there could be sedimentation in that area. So we have to have the ditch go all the way to the natural body way. But like I said, well, there's no reason to lower it any further than we have to maintain the culvert empty at Clementa. That's, I guess, my point. But I don't think we could vacate it or abandon it. I mean, you have to go there because at some point in the future, whether it's 25 years or 50 years, sedimentation has a tendency to build up and restrict the flow,
So
and it
you're
would back
talking
up.
up here. You couldn't abandon from there?
No, because it could sediment here and then back all the way up.
Yeah, and the real thing to look at is this grade line, which you probably can't see, but you know, there's a lot of fall between the culvert at Clementa all the way across the Schoen's property.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the sediment right now, if that's the line, is basically level with the culvert. So the water does flow. It would take a lot of sedimentation, and by the time that happened, the engineers will either tell me I'm right or wrong on this, by the time that happened, this croppable ground here would start to get inundated, and I think it would be in the property owner's interest unless they were going to...
I don't think it would go quite that high.
Well, it's going to do some, it's going to do
something. It would raise some, yes.
So it may be possible that you don't have to establish it to here, but the engineer could make a recommendation in order to protect the outlet, maybe to establish it to a lesser extent, and you would still be fine because of the grades across the property.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really an engineering thing, but if that's where you want to go, then that's the direction that you should provide to staff to try to work through, and maybe then, even before having to make a final decision on this, it's something that we could find that would be agreeable to this particular objecting.
I guess my point is, right now, there is obstruction between the marshy area at Schoen's and the natural waterway to the east, I guess, of their property. Otherwise, the marsh wouldn't be growing like it is, like growing or whatever.
But that's on their property.
Exactly.
So, and that has nothing to do with the ditch.
Right, but eventually, though, if it gets high enough, it will back up. It might be a foot, maybe, I don't know, I'd like, Mike, can you come up and speak to this at all, or do you have enough info with you for the elevations, I guess? Like, what is maybe Chris, you can, okay, what's the elevation at the natural waterway? And then what is it at I'm just thinking the water level, I guess I'm even talking.
So there's actually on the Sonus's property, there's about a 5-foot drop from the culvert at Clementa all the way down to the east property line.
Right.
So it seems to me that it would be unlikely that anything that would be occurring toward that east property line in the way of an obstruction would have an effect on anything upstream of the Sonus's property, upstream of Clementa. So I agree totally with Mr. Kolb's discussion on that, if the ditch were to be established at some point that is east of Clementa, but not necessarily all the way to the property line, the Drainage Authority and I should say the benefiting landowners would still maintain the same benefit of the system without having to necessarily have an insured outlet past that.
I guess here's my point. There's a water level right now, there's fall from the culvert at Clementa to the water level in the marsh at Shones's. It's not 3 feet. It's about a foot because of the blockage further to the east that's holding the water on the Shones's property, which they want, and that's fine. I have no problem with it. But at some point, if that keeps getting higher and higher, and now the water level in the marsh is at the same level as the culvert, then we're still okay. But once it goes higher than that, now we have we have an issue that's going to affect drainage, so.
Aren't there 2 homes over in that area?
What?
No,
I was thinking, looking at it at one time, that if that ever got that high, it would have a detriment to the one house that was right along the road, or a building or something.
Well, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense to look at possible engineering and shortening up that last leg of it. Because it looks, because
to look into it is
look
fine.
into it. I think, and I think that's where I would like to make a motion, moving in terms of looking at having the engineering work with the landowners and seeing if we can find more of a natural ending to it, since there's going to be enough fall on that backside.
And I'm totally fine with that. That is a motion?
Do you want me to put it through there, want me to make the legal?
We didn't close public comment yet.
I understand, but, okay, so procedurally, if that's the direction that the board wants to go, and that's the motion that Commissioner Vetch wants to make, then my request of the board would be that motion be to send the materials back to the engineer for further consideration as to whether or not that last leg can be shortened to a point that would be more acceptable to the Shoneses, number one. And then number two, to recess the public hearing again to your meeting on November 7th, so that this can all be brought back to you. That, I think, gives us sufficient time to look at it, to work with the Shoneses and their attorney and even their consultants if that's necessary, in order to maybe find a better spot there. Understanding that their primary concern is about protecting those wetland resources on their property. It's not about flooding their neighbors. They don't want to do that, so we can probably find a spot where it makes good sense. So if you're going to make that motion, Commissioner Vetch, I would ask again that it be to refer the matter back to the engineer for some further investigation of a different ending point for the drainage system, number one, and then number two, to recess this to your regular meeting at 9 o'clock on November 7th.
Okay, and then could the motion also include to either shorten it or come up with a control structure or some other?
However.
Yeah, whatever, our recommendations per the engineering.
Okay, give that a shot there.
I'd like to make a motion then to refer the ditch 38, what do we call this, the matter back to engineering for possible options for either shortening or structure
options
or options for a future plan on ditch 38.
And to continue it?
And to continue it at our regular board meeting on November 7th.
I think we're good.
I'll second that with an amendment for the engineers to also look at that lateral on the south side, which is currently not listed on these drawings.
On the south side of Highway 12?
No, on the south side of the
railroad.
Oh, to look, that's private tiles for sure, though.
Well, if it's private tile, it still should be listed on there, on the drawings or something, I believe.
Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, it's an issue,
Sure. Just to be clear, when we're looking at this and doing the reestablishment, we do not look at any private tiles, private open channels, any of that. We stick strictly with the public drainage system record. There certainly may be other private tiles or ditches that are coming into any one of the 3 ditches that we consider today, but that was not within our scope, and that it's outside of what we're doing under 103E 101.
Yeah. It's private.
I know, but it's still, to me.
We have no jurisdiction.
It shouldn't be attached to a public drainage ditch without the proper requirements.
Yeah.
To me, I would think.
A lot of culverts drain into
But
public ditches.
they have them everywhere.
That happens all.
Every ditch has tiles
Right.
coming into it.
Yeah,
So,
pretty much.
Okay.
so you'll just second it though?
You need a second or, yep.
Okay, all right, so motion and second, further discussion now, go ahead if you have, Lauren. But you were trying to address Ms. Gates' issue with the
Yeah,
flooding out there.
with that ditch,
And-
well, I mean, again, with the culvert connected
You know,
to a closed system, to me, just,
Yeah,
it bothers me that people just did it without
Well-
ever getting the proper permits or requests or information or whatever the case may be.
at least they did a good job. But if it wasn't connected, then there wouldn't be any venue for that water to drain at all, so I mean, it's, you know,
Yeah.
it's just, I think what Ms. Gates is talking about is, she needs that system to work for the drainage, even as poor as it is right now, without getting any worse, so. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I can just mention one more thing about that. That could also be something that could be looked at as part of a repair report along the drainage system. If you wanted to move forward with something like that, that would be appropriate for that kind of a report.
Okay. I'm going to keep public comment open then for this, so that on the November 7th, we could still have public input. John, is that, or should I close public? I didn't vote on the motion here yet either.
Again, motion's on the table, motion's on the floor. So what you've done so far is, in the matter of County Ditch 18, records correction proceedings, you have closed the public comment portion, and you have recessed that to your regular meeting on November 7th, 2017 at 9 o'clock at an appropriate time on the board's agenda. As to the Ditch 36 matter, you have done the same. You have closed the public comment portion. You have recessed it to your November 7th, 2017 meeting. As to Ditch 38, the motion on the floor does not close the public comment period. You are simply returning the matter to the engineer for further consideration of options, and you are recessing the entire thing again to your November 7th, 2017 regular meeting, at which time you will reopen the proceeding in 38 for the purpose of receiving additional information from the engineer and taking additional public comment.
Correct. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't closing public
You're on
comment.
it.
So. Okay. Any further discussion up here? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimous.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Potter.
before we move on, we've recessed this, but there's a couple points that were made here that I kind of want to clarify. It was stated that aerials don't lie, and I've understand that some people believe that, but that's not necessarily the truth, because when they take an aerial photo, they take it in the spring of the year before foliage starts in. There's been many instances where people, after that aerial photo has been taken, and some years they don't take it because cloud cover and it gets too late. There are instances where people have done fixed things and farmed over it, and you're not aware of what happened there. Only through discovery later do you find out what's going on. So aerial photos, even though you say they don't lie, they don't necessarily tell the whole story. Okay, the other part of it is, you know, being a city boy moving out here, and I getting to know quite a few farmers around, not only Wright County, but cousins and relatives there. A lot of farmers were fairly ignorant of the law that's sitting out there, and most of them did handshakes agreements. I happen to own a piece of property that was a handshake agreement with a half a dozen farmers going from Albertville all the way to the Mississippi River. and they all, one had the horses with the thing, and the other did the thing, and they put tile in. There was no permit, there was no anything done, and they all did it because they all benefited something on it, and in some cases, because of drainage authorities or whatever, not wanting to touch it, they just did it. You know, so that happens all in, not this county, but the state, the country, it happens all over the place. Farmers Tech typically take the common sense approach. We have a problem, we got to deal with it. I can't sit and wait for this because the crop's got to get in, got to feed my family and all this. So it's not necessarily that they're doing something illegal. They just took action on something, and maybe they're a little ignorant on what the law is, because sometimes in the past it hasn't been communicated very well with them. What is the law? What is your obligation? They end up doing it anyway. I just want to make that statement for that. This comes from a city boy perspective, coming out here and dealing with how farmers deal with things.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
All right. We are done with the ditch things, and we have a few more items to consider. If you do leave, try to be as quiet as you can. Otherwise, we just have a few minutes left here, too. So, Commissioner Houston, you had some
items?
Updates or anything for us?
No, I don't.
Okay.
In my other life, I was out of the country last weekend, but that's for another day.
Okay, and I don't have anything either. Commissioner Delight.
In the interest of time, I'll pass.
Okay.
Bring it up next week.
Same here, in the interest of time, I will pass, I'll bring it up.
Okay, and we do have an owners committee of the whole at 11 o'clock today.
And the other, some of us have another one at 12.
And tomorrow is the soil water tour. The bus will be out here at 10:30.
Are you?
Yours truly is driving.
Oh, you're
Don't
going?
be afraid to go.
I had considered it, now I'm not going.
Okay, we are adjourned at 10, anything else, Lee? We're adjourned at 10:59. 11:59, sorry. 11.